Hello and welcome back to another episode of DLC. I'm your host this time, Joey, and I am talking to you today about a game called Final Fall. Now, before we get into today's episode, I do want to give a big trigger warning that there will be mentions of trauma and suicide within this DLC because they are core elements of the game. So today, as I said, we're stepping into a place that's dark and decayed and a little exhausting, and that is called Final Fall. I want to thank the folks over at Game.Press and our friend Emmanouil Kaparos Kaparakis, the developer of Final Fall, for giving us a review copy of this game. Final Fall is a psychological horror game that tackles some very heavy themes. You're thrown into a twisted asylum after a failed suicide attempt. The game dares you to survive both the setting and your own mind. Sounds very intense, right? Well, does it deliver? Let's just say I've got a couple of thoughts. Buckle in. So Final Fall is the brainchild of solo developer Emmanouil Kaparos Kaparakis. And first of all, hats off to anyone building an entire horror game in the Unreal 5 engine from scratch. It's no small feat. You play as Ophelia, a woman suffering from schizophrenia, memory loss, and a history of trauma. She wakes up in a crumbling asylum after a failed suicide attempt, and the game's central hook is that you're not just escaping the physical danger, you're also navigating the chaos inside Ophelia's mind. It's deep, it's raw, and it wants to be meaningful, which I respect. But here's where things get complicated. So first of all, let's talk gameplay. And here's where Final Fall starts to stumble a little bit. It's slow, especially to begin with, and I mean like painfully slow at times. Sometimes movement feels exceptionally clunky, the controls are a little awkward, and there's this constant drag on pacing, which turns tension into tedium. You're wandering around the asylum a lot, and while that's par for the course in a lot of psychological horror games, here it sometimes felt more like filler. There was a lot of jump scares. I lost count after the fifth loud scream from nowhere moment, and after a while it stops being scary and becomes just noise. It's the horror game equivalent of someone slamming a door every time that you blink. There's a really interesting mechanic in Final Fall, and I choose the word interesting very intentionally. It's a save deletion mechanic. If you make the wrong choices and die by suicide 3 times within the game, your save gets wiped. It's a bold move, sure, but in practice, it sometimes felt more punishing than profound, especially when you die not from a meaningful decision, but because the UI fumbled and you missed a tiny cue. The atmosphere and the visuals are where Final Fall shines. I think the visuals shine in a gorgeous, grim, decaying, what is reality sort of way. As I said, this game was built in Unreal Engine 5, and the game warps the environment based on Ophelia's mental state. You'll turn a corner and suddenly a hallway's melting. Or you're walking through a memory stitched into the asylum walls. It's unsettling, but in the best way. I think Silent Hill-esque without feeling like it's a rip-off. The setting itself of the asylum is beautifully miserable. Rotting tiles, flickering lights, blood-stained patient files, it nails the vibe it was going for, and paired with some seriously disturbing sound design, whispers, creaks, ambient distortions, you feel the unease even when nothing is happening. In fact, it's those quiet moments where the game feels most effective and it really gets the tension going. I've got to say that Ophelia is a fairly compelling protagonist. She's not just a vessel for horror. Her internal dialogue, fragmented memories, and the way the game externalizes her trauma to the world around her, that's the stuff that really works. You get the sense that there's a real person there, not just a screaming horror mannequin. And while the narrative doesn't always flow smoothly, there are moments where the game stumbles to some real emotional weight. That feeling of hopelessness, of trying to hold on to reality, it lands. Sometimes. I wish the writing had a little bit more room to breathe. It leans so heavily on the atmosphere, but some clearer storytelling would have made Ophelia's journey hit even harder. So, where does that leave us? Final Fall is ambitious. It's atmospheric, it's emotionally charged, it's clearly a labour of love. And I really want to applaud the dev for creating a game that they're clearly inspired by the games that they enjoy, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, but doesn't feel like they're ripping them off. The downside of Final Fall is that the gameplay issues hold it back. The clunky movement, repetitive jump scares, and frustrating save system end up undermining the powerful themes that it's trying to explore. It's one of those games where I kept thinking, this is close to being excellent. If it had more polish, smoother mechanics, and more nuanced pacing, it could have been a standout indie horror title. If you're going for atmospheric horror and can look past some rough edges, I think Final Fall is really worth a try. Just go in with a lot of patience. I'm going to give Final Fall a 6.5 out of 10. Final Fall is available now on Steam. And that's it for this week's DLC. If you played Final Fall, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Were you scared, frustrated, or both? Don't forget to drop us a follow on the Game Club Pod Twitter, that's @GameClubPod, or join our Discord, where our listeners love to have a chat with each other after each of the episodes.
There's a moment just before the fall when everything feels still. The noise, the chaos, it fades away. And all that's left is the silence. Silence is dangerous. It whispers things you're too scared to hear. Things you thought you could bury forever. Maybe down there, I'll find peace. I can't escape the truth so far.
Good morning, Ophelia. Pull the trigger. You got that. Do it. Do it.
The operation will begin in 20 seconds.
Choices that